following is intended only for mature audiences.
Open your ears and lube up your butthole. It's time for the What Do We Call It podcast. Now, here's your host. It's Jmann. Welcome to the What Do We Call It podcast. I'm Jmann.
This is Steiny.
Hello there.
So recently, the Minneapolis City Council voted to okay the public broadcasting of the Muslim call to prayer in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood from speakers on the tops of mosques.
How do the people of Riverside feel about that?
Well, I've seen nothing but complaints from people that I assume are not Muslim in all the various stories where you can comment on shit. I'm sure all the Somalis that live around there are super fucking geeked out that they can have their call to prayer broadcast, but the thing of it is if you don't know Islam, they pray 5 times a day. Mm-hmm. And it starts at first light, which is way too early to hear fucking coming out of the fucking speakers of some place down the block if you live nearby.
That'd be tough if I worked like a late shift and came back and that was like right in the middle of me getting to bed or something like that, or skating for the night.
Because we were debating about this on the phone last week, what we thought about whether or not they were actually playing it, and I dug deeper, and they are playing it. And one of the stories I found showed a guy who was double-checking the speaker wire on top of a building. And it looked like they put speakers aimed up at the sky at an angle, like it was a fucking missile launcher in the middle of like Saudi Arabia. It looked all kinds of bizarre. And when we had that conversation on the phone, you brought up a very good point. What's the difference between that and church bells?
Right.
Well, church bells don't get rung until like 8 a.m. or 10 a.m.
Right.
That shit is not going on as early as 3:45 in some parts of the summer around here.
Right. And it's also, to one step further, it's also one day a week, whereas how many days a week are they playing this Muslim call to prayer? I'm assuming every day?
Well, I know it's every day during Ramadan, which just got over, so that's 30 days. Whether or not they do it every day of the week, I don't know, but I would say that they're probably just going to go carte blanche and do it as much as they fucking can.
Until somebody tries to stop or complain, and then they say religious infringement and that and this and the other.
Well, this is the interesting thing, because there are multiple Muslims on the Minneapolis City Council now, and that explains why I think this got pushed through after a previous attempt.
Sure.
And it's a very liberal city council, so it's like they're aiming to please, but there's the issue of religious preference here. Because you're not going to broadcast the Torah outside of any temple. You have the church bells for various Western religions that are forms of, Protestantism or Catholicism or Christianity, but it's not as intrusive due to the time of day.
Right.
The reason it's a problem is uniquely due to the times that the Muslim call to prayer is, and it's so frequent that people are like, oh my God, they're pulling this not in my backyard shit. But I really just can't believe that a government agency is sanctioning something that one religion can do, and you're basically showing preference.
Right.
Our government is not supposed to show any sort of religious preference.
Right. But we know that for historical, reasons for whatever, that has not always been the case, has definitely not been the case. But, we like to think going forward, we're supposed to be more conscientious. And what it gets me is that for somebody's religious freedom here now, you're impeding on somebody else's right to what? Peace of mind, quiet?
Well, you would say it's religious
sleep?
Freedom versus personal freedom.
Right. And so I know we have all these things where we infringe on people's personal freedoms for the greater good. Why we make people wear seatbelts and all these other things. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Well, actually, follow the money. There are a lot of reasons why, is because insurance companies didn't want to be paying out insurance policies and this and that because so many people were dying. But anyway, going back to it, it is interesting how in this day and age we are almost kind of doing something that's forcing a religion upon others, no matter what it is.
It's like a microcosm of the grand scheme of God bless America, in God we trust. I mean, it's on our fucking money. And when you talk about what God is this, it's Christian God.
Yeah. But I also recently took a trip out to Maryland, which is where we were, was technically the South, right? You know, like Virginia area, D.C., south of D.C. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to see all these things out there that are just commonplace. Religion is so much more in your face out there. Billboards, religious speakers that go around and do these big, you know, stadium tours and
I got to imagine that there's a number of statues outside of government buildings and courthouses that are reflective of crosses or the Ten Commandments I've heard of before and shit like that.
Yep.
Which boggles my mind because, again, why are you letting religion guide the government? It's not okay. Not everybody subscribes to those beliefs. We're not all theists. So to do this around Cedar Riverside, and I assume other neighborhoods are going to want to do this also, and be like, oh, hey, well, if they do it, can't we do it? Then you're going to get into, like, migrating it towards the suburbs, and then you're really going to see the pissed off Karens out there like, absolutely not, I don't want to hear this.
Yep. Well, so there is a strong Somali community and therefore Muslim community within the Twin Cities area. There's also a very strong Southeast Asian community as well. And I've seen various temples and whatnot. And so I wonder, do they have anything that they do that kind of affects the surrounding area the same way? I mean, are there any bells or any particular calls to prayer that they do as well? You know what I mean? So is this a little bit more prevalent than we'd like to know, or that we maybe would know?
I don't think it would be with the or Eastern religions of that nature, because there's a bunch of temples around here, like Buddhist temples and shit, and I've driven by a bunch of them and been around them for hours at a time and heard nothing. I think it's all for statues and show outside to make it as picturesque for the garden, and anything that would be directly involved in service or sermon would be inside. Now, I've been in a mosque. It was when I went to
The beast's
father's funeral.
Oh, yeah.
And there was nothing outside. I mean, you go inside, and it's just as I had read and seen. Women are sitting in a different section with the children behind curtains so they can't be distracting. And the men are sitting in rows on the floor.
Yep.
And then you bow when they bow, which I've mentioned before. Blew her brother's mind that I knew how to do this. He's like, how did he know when to bow? I'm like, motherfucker, do you ever just go somewhere and do the shit that everybody else is doing?
It's called
to be a chameleon?
Yeah.
You don't want to ruffle feathers. Now, I don't go around actively saying assalamu alaikum to people, but guess what? I did that day because I wanted to be welcoming. It's their building. I'm the guest. I don't really need to do anything, but I wanted to be.
Right. And you put forth the effort to be respectful. I mean, I don't think that's a bad thing. Some people do. Some people think that's beneath them or too much to ask. But
well, I wasn't seeing it as kowtowing to anybody's religion or ego. I just wanted to go there and be like, okay, this is important to her mom, and she's got uncles and aunts that are here in town, or siblings that are in town, and they're like super Muslim. Mm-hmm. They came in from like Ohio and shit. So it's like, this is when we were together and things were still decent to some extent, if you could paint it that way. I wanted to make a good impression on them.
Sure.
So I did whatever I could. And honestly, if for some reason I find myself in a church, which this past weekend, I had a cousin who passed away back in February. Now, there used to be 4 of us on my mom's side. My mom had my sister and me, and her sister had 2 daughters. I'm the last one standing now.
You had told me about this. I believe you had mentioned this one before, that she was not in good health.
No, she had her 3rd bout of cancer, and it just exploded all over her body. And then she went on hospice. Like, they thought about maybe doing chemo, but hospice. Point being, though, is that her funeral was held at a church. And I'm in there, and I'm sitting there, and I'm listening to people read religious readings, and it's overseen by the priest of the church. And where I'm sitting, I'm staring up at a big stained glass window where Jesus is gazing upon me in a non-judgmental way, thankfully.
This time.
Yeah. But I'm in a church, and I'm going to say the Serenity Prayer and not be a stuck-up dick about it. Be like, I'm an atheist. I'm not fucking doing it. Like, no. If I was a teenager, I might pull that shit. But I'm a 40-year-old fucking man that was raised in the Catholic Church. I kind of know how most of this shit works and correlates to all these similar religions, especially between Catholicism and Lutheranism. And I did what I had to do to be respectful, because I was there for my aunt.
That's how I always looked at it. I was there for somebody else for some other reason, not for my own. And I wasn't going to put my own beliefs ahead of somebody else's. I can respect what they believe and quote unquote go along for them or for the family or whoever's left.
But imagine now if they took all that Lutheran weekly service or like a Saturday mass and they did it in the parking lot of the church to accommodate so many people, and they had big loudspeakers that echoed in the neighborhood nearby.
Right. And I lived in that neighborhood or something like to that effect. Yeah.
You're going to go, I have no problem with this church being here. Believe what you're going to believe. It doesn't affect me. You're not forcing me. But now if I'm trying to like barbecue in my backyard while my kids play on the swing set or something, and all I hear is fucking church, that to me is a bridge too far.
Right. Well, and just think about it. What if I can't handle this, and now you want to sell? Good luck trying to sell your home if those things are ringing every time that they go to show the house,
Yeah, it's bad enough having to worry about like your shitty neighbor comes outside with a beer in his hand and no shirt on. He's like,
yeah.
Are you moving? Where are you going to go?
Oh, my best friend.
Well, he's a real good guy. You should buy his house, even though somebody died in it.
Yeah, I think there's a couple bodies under the porch.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. Now fuck off.
Right.
So I really just don't get why this is a thing now. Do it inside your mosque. Why does it have to affect the neighbors? If you want to be accepted, don't you want to fly under the radar? Don't you want to not piss off the neighbors? Don't you want to not attract negative attention to your religion, which, by the way, since 9/11 has been on a non-stop negative publicity tour, whether you wanted it to be or not?
But you see, what you just described there is the American way of thought. That's basically what so many of our ancestors did when they came here, is you kind of give up a little bit of your heritage to become part of America, right? Some people carry that forward, but there's a reason why a lot of things is just kind of a shared Americana culture nowadays. It's something beyond religions and traditions. And so I think what you're saying is basically, since they're newer here, they haven't quite realized that that's the long-term effect of being in America, is you lose a lot of those traditions, or they basically get twisted and perverted just a little bit, right? St. Patty's Day and all these other religious holidays that, become Americanized.
But they could easily just via an app, like a couple of churches who clearly must have some members or affiliates that are IT people that can build an app, or have a college-age child that can build an app to broadcast the call to prayer. Why not, instead of making it a public nuisance and creating friction,
resentment, yeah,
why would you not come up with like a happier medium, like, well, we want to broadcast to as many as we can, but at the same time we want to be conscientious towards our neighbors, so let's do it via phones, because everybody has smartphones.
Yeah.
I know tons of Muslim people who have smartphones. Mostly they're women that drive with them tucked into their fucking head wrap, which is totally like getting around the hands-free law.
Yeah.
And the political controversy, holy Christ.
Yeah.
You were just waiting for fucking angry white people to be like, how dare those Muslims do that?
Well, and there's been incidences over the last, 10, 15 years, ever since 9/11. Even within our own backyard, mosques that have been attacked,
shot up,
burned. Yeah, the fire bombs from the guys that came in from way out of town for whatever reason.
That was in Wisconsin, right? Was it Milwaukee?
The
burning of the mosque? Because the worst incident of violence against Muslims that I can recall is Christchurch. And the guy went in and had the video of just mowing people down, and it was fucking ghastly.
Yeah.
I watched that once upon a time ago on bestgore.com. I miss you, bestgore.com. So I don't think I'm being unreasonable by proposing that they shouldn't have done this.
I'm sure you and half the Riverside community that aren't Muslim agree with you. Yeah.
Because I'll be honest, when I go around there, there's houses that are within blocks of the Riverside high-rise.
Oh, yeah.
Like I went to a show recently at the Caboose, and that's just
right,
a stone's throw.
Yep.
And then on the other side of 55 is, what is that, Little Earth?
Yeah, Little Earth. Yep, no, you're right. The little reservation that's down there. Yep.
So if it's loud enough that they're doing it and you can hear it, because the mosques aren't going to be right in the parking lot of the Riverside high rise. They're
Right.
going to be in the surrounding streets. And there's houses all around there.
Yeah.
It should have occurred to somebody, we want this, but you're really just saying, fuck my neighbors. My religion's more important than your comfort.
And maybe that goes down to religions and people in positions of power within religions thinking it's their responsibility to broadcast the message as much as they can to everybody else. You know, for some reason there's some obligation that everyone has to spread the word, no matter what religion they're a part of. And so that's what kind of gets me too. Like, isn't it, I'm not religious, but isn't it part of your duty as somebody who follows a faith? Isn't it your responsibility to show up for prayer, to show up to church, temple, the various traditions, religious important dates, all those types of things? I mean, so going back to your point about even having an app, why would you need it if you were a good Muslim? Why would you need it if you were a good Christian? Or, you know what I mean?
Well, because you're working or you're taking care of the kids or something, I assume. Is how they will pose that. Is I'm busy taking care of friends or family.
Sure, in this day and age, convenience and things like that. Well,
because haven't you ever worked at a place where they had to accommodate somebody with a space for a prayer rug to privately conduct their religious prayers and ceremonies?
Yeah.
Even at the jail, we had to have a fucking room for a guy to go with his prayer rug 5 times a day. And I was like, holy shit, are we really doing this?
It just seems like a very involved religion to have to do that many times a day, every day, if that is truly the case.
Yeah, like you have to set timers on your Apple Watch.
That's what I mean, right? I mean, so if you're talking about its convenience to remind people to come to prayer, there are other methods to do that, like you said, multiple timers a day. And granted, maybe it changes per day based on the sunrise and sunset, so that's why it's more convenient to have this type of call versus an app. But
well, think about in the winter around here if they broadcast it. 5 times a day, and then you have first light.
First
and
light's
then
at
you have
7 in the morning sometimes in the winter. It's
a
late.
little bit later, but then, it gets dark at 4:30 in the fucking afternoon.
Yeah.
So that's a block of them all happening in rapid succession every few
couple
hours.
Yeah.
So this isn't like a big controversy where I'm going to fucking shake my fists angrily at anybody. I just thought that it was a curious precedent to show that preference to the Muslim community around there, and I just wonder where it's going to go. I hope it's going to be peaceful. And if anybody's going to demonstrate against it, hopefully they're respectful in how they communicate their point and not, outside fucking wearing their MAGA hats and shaking their fists and yelling, "Go back to your country."
Yeah, that always goes well, doesn't it?
Interact with the show on Twitter at What Do We Call It? That is at What Do We Call It? You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/group/What Do We Call It podcast show. For the What Do We Call It podcast, I'm Jmann.
This is Steiny.
And that's the end.